want to stay on issues for a minute, but transition to policy and political responses. And this goes to Angela's earlier point about democracy. The image Angela gave us of structural racism being baked into society is a profound one. Yeah. And all the issues that you've mentioned are very hard, profound, challenging issues. And sometimes they can lead to a sense of paralysis. So I want you to help us out of that, maybe that sense of paralysis. And let's do this. Let's say we're a year or two into the future. Angela and Rinku, you've been selected by the Obama-Clinton team to be on their transition team for the White House, and you're going to make recommendations for policy responses around a racial justice agenda. What would those be? Juan, you've been selected by the Sharpton presidential team. Al Sharpton announced yesterday he was running, so he wants you as his top advisor. What are you going to advise to Reverend Sharpton? And Winona, you are the president. You run again.
One thing that would be important during the transition period, would be to get rid of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We really need to have a department that is able to respond to the complexity of the challenges that people face in the context of where they live. It's metropolitan regions, it's building community, it's how to be able to actually focus on the social and economic challenges of trying to be able to have steps, platforms, and ladders that allow you to move up to opportunity. It seems that in this country, one of the things that defines the 21st century is that where you live has literally become a proxy for opportunity. It determines what kind of schools you go to, whether you can pull equity out of your home, whether you're going to be healthy in terms of the air you breathe, whether you're going to have access to grocery stores. It even determines the kind of networks that you're going to have that will have a lot to say about what the quality of your civic life is going to be. And so if that's true, we need to be much more expansive about how we think of the role of government and policy in responding to the fact that where you live has so much to do with these other things. And the housing and urban development, both the name and what it's become, which is just so tiny and so off point, I think is one place where a big change could be made. But I would not say that that's the most important change. I just start there.
Mm-hmm. I think the place where I would start would be in figuring out how to raise taxes from the wealthy. And I would do that first as a baseline piece of policy so that we could guarantee having enough revenue to then run truly universal healthcare and education programs in particular. And then I think I'd get to work on really redoing our immigration policy so that it was much, 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 much more open than it is now, so that its goal was to ease people's movement in and out of the country, actually, and so that it was a modern immigration policy that fit the global economy and that helped out the 21st century development of the anti-colonialist movements of the 20th century. And I think the third thing I would do, which is harder to know how to do, is I'd put a team to work on figuring out how racism could be redefined to take the intention requirement out of the definition of racism. That is, I would think about Supreme Court appointments, and I would think about legislation, civil rights legislation, that did not require someone to prove that there was the intention to discriminate in order to prove that discrimination had happened.
For me, I would definitely counsel him to wage a campaign for the people of America's cities to take back their cities. America's cities are being redesigned. They are being redesigned along the European model. It used to be that in America's cities, the poor lived in the central cities, whereas in the European cities, the poor live in the outskirts. All right. What happened is in the 70s and 80s, as more and more African Americans and Latinos started getting elected and gaining political control of the cities, there's been a movement ever since then by the elites of all of these urban areas to redesign their cities. They don't build low-cost housing anymore. They're driving up the prices of housing. They are pushing, the poor now are being pushed out into the suburban areas. This is happening in every city in America, and what the elites are doing is they're carving out authorities, or what I call off-the-books corporations, whether it's a transit authority, a redevelopment authority, convention authority, to run all of these parts of government that used to be run by the government through unelected groups with their separate revenue streams. So they're choking off the revenue streams of the governments, of the Black and Latino officials who are now running these city councils and these governments, denying them their revenue into unappointed agencies, while at the same, unelected agencies, while at the same time they are continuing the drive to push people out. So that really anybody, and Reverend Sharpton always talks about an urban agenda. The agenda has to be to take back the cities for the people who live in them, and to have democratic control of the cities more, get rid of all of these redevelopment authorities, these transportation authorities, and all these other groups that are just siphoning off revenue and not allowing cities to properly be able to fund themselves.
Food is a human right. Should be able to eat, should have some food security, should not have to buy something that's going to make you sick. So, I think that foundationally, the United States is a society which is based on conquest. Always has been, still is. The idea that there's always a new frontier, someplace else to take over. I mean, that's why I consume a third of the world's resources. Got to get it from someplace. Got to keep taking it from someone else, violating someone else's human rights. And so you got a country in which the foreign policy is based on a military policy. So you got to tackle that first. So there's half your budget right there, which is totally misspent on militarizing everybody and then creating refugees. That's my own community's experience. We were made refugees early on, 1900s. A lot of our people were driven off reservation for this, and so that's the whole experience. And so every piece of that. The second thing is that I look at a lot of America's policies and the structure of the society in terms of its lack of sustainability. The reality is that a society based on conquest is not sustainable. So what happens is that we have an entirely linear society. That is to say that our whole creation of wealth system, taking natural resources, we turn them into products and garbage. 50 trillion pounds of garbage a year in the United States? Pretty much no plan on that one, right? That's what we do really well. We make useless things. We're totally inefficient in our production systems, and we create garbage. We create garbage in every element of our society. Our energy systems, you got nuclear waste, you got CO2 emissions. Every one of our industrial production systems is so inefficient and is entirely linear. It is entirely unsustainable. You have to create systems that are more cyclical, that are sustainable, where you use a lot less, you make conservation choices, and you don't end up, with one on the other end of it so much garbage. The reality is that our social systems are exactly identical. Our largest social output in this society, one of our largest, what are the two largest growth industries in this country? What? Prisons and trash collecting, right? I mean, you want security? Go, get your town to sign up for a prison. You're set. More prisons than anybody else in the world, right? That is a social creation of garbage, right? So it's this linear system that is entirely unsustainable where you keep institutionalizing people.